Hi, my name is Jawad Ahmed and these are my teammates Hamza Mubashir, Hamza Naeem and Khubaib. We are first semester grad student and today we are presenting our proposal called Longevity to Work, which is inspired by Pathway to Work. So, first of all, what are GNNs and how we can use GNNs to analyze relationship analysis? So, first of all, what are GNNs? GNNs are machine learning models that can use the input of a graph and then use the relationship between the nodes to represent how these can be used provide the insights between the nodes and between the biomarkers.
Speak a little louder.
On the right hand side, you can see the biomarkers are represented by the nodes, like for the person, like the BMI, the blood pressure, the sugar, blood sugar, body temperature, and the pulse. And the dotted lines represent the unrelationship node data between them. But if we put that input into the GNNs and apply neural networks to them, on the right hand side you can see that the intensity of the edges between them represent how each of the biomarkers are connected with each other. For example, if a person's stress goes high, it has a direct correlation between the blood sugar, the BMI, or the blood pressure. But if the stress goes high, it has very less correlation with how the body temperature or the pulse of the person changes. Now, Hamza Mubashir will further tell how Pathway to Work uses this neural network.
Yeah, so this is kind of the backbone over here. Pathway to Vector is basically our approach to get embeddings out of our data from biomarkers. And what we're doing basically here is that on bottommost layer, GNNs basically were a two-dimensional space where we were representing each node as each individual biomarker and seeing relationships between them. But what Pathway to Vector allows us is to kind of get this hierarchical representation where there is a web of and network of relationships between each node. So in the bottommost layer you have your enzymes which can contribute to the chemical reactions of compounds. The compounds then are associated with those enzymes, and at the end of the day a pathway associated with a couple of compounds represents a metabolic function or a chemical reaction. Now you're trying to find out if you map this out into a 2D vector space. The points that are closer together over here, these are your pathways. Similar pathways mapped together in the 2D vector space, if they're close together, represent that they are associated to a similar biochemical function or a metabolic function. Now just and rust, because you need to find these relationships, are methods of how you can move through these pathways and find out which relationships are working. Just basically allows you to do that in a direct way, but Rust allows you to do that indirectly with diversification, where you can now move back to even your enzymes or to your neighboring compounds as well. Now, how is this related to longevity and how are we moving forward with it? Consider this graph on the left to be your pathway profile from when you were aged 10, and the one on the right to be from when you were aged 20. These pathway profiles change over time. Your metabolic functions, your body, biochemical reactions within your body do change. And what we're trying to evaluate is how we can quantify what we call aging, the aging process. So say for instance, when you're mapping those compounds into this 2D vector space, they've deviated from their position over here to somewhere over there. Your pathway functions, which are basically representing your metabolic functions, have also deviated, and we're trying to find out how basically everything that we experienced as we aged and we quantified into 2D vector spaces basically using graphs. So now Hamza Naeem will explain how the longevity to vector model is going to be using pathway to vector to do this.
Okay, so this is where we propose our longevity to work. So as Hamza explained that it is based upon pathway to work. So basically what this represents is that at age 10, 20 and through 70, 80, through early ages to your old ages, it represents the basically network pathways of a specific individual that is a relationship between their enzymes, compounds and different pathways. So what we do is that either you can take it for an individual or if you can also take it for an individual and their close relatives as well, because you know that some of the genes that are related to aging comes from basically your genetics as well. So what you do is that each simultaneously the two pathways are basically go to difference layer. So difference layer here is where we basically capture the essence of the difference between two pathway vectors. For example, what changed from year 10, from when he was 10 years or to when he was 20 years, what changed? What compounds were different, what enzymes were acting as catalyst when he was 20 and what enzymes were acting as a catalyst when he was 10. So basically this difference layer then produce embeddings that are age specific. For example, the first embedding here would be the age specific embedding for when he was 10 to 20 years old. You can basically differentiate between these gaps to basically get more intrinsic results, like you can get at 10 and 15 as well. But this difference layer basically it will produce another list of embeddings that are basically pinpoint to those changes that basically lead to aging or different biological process that are changing when a person basically grows. So what we do is then these embeddings are go to transformer where the sort of magic happens. What transformer does is it basically learns the temporal sequence between these embeddings. Now those temporal sequence once learned can be used to pinpoint specific actionable insights as well as which compounds and which enzymes were differentiating or along the lifespan of a person. For example, the one actionable insight here is energy metabolism. For example, when you age up, basically when you age, you see that your energy starts to decline, and when your energy starts to decline, you see that maybe lead to any other, for example, it may be mitochondria or something like that. So what happens is that you can, based on these insights, do an intervention. That intervention can be chemical, scientific, or even lifestyle changes. Based on those interventions, you can basically fight the aging process. This can happen in basically neurotrophic factor, which is basically the study of your nerves and how they are growing or how they are declining, and then circadian rhythm and basically genomic stability, where basically your DNA is damaging. Now applications will be done by Khubaib.
Yeah. So far we have learned that using longevity to work, what we are doing is we are understanding how pathways are changing over time for any individual. So using those, our understanding of these changes, what we can do is we can predict how their lifespan will be. Like if the person pathway is such that his or her immune system is decreasing, so he would not live a very healthy life statistically. So what intervention can be that we advise some medical changes, some lifestyle changes, so that their pathway in the next year would be better, right? So we are understanding the underlying principle behind the aging mechanism using this pathway relationship, pathway enzymes and compounds, and using that, as we are understanding what compounds are decreasing, what enzymes are decreasing, how the pathways are changing over time, we can also recommend some, we can do some drug discovery that the person has a lower enzyme A, right? So what we can do is we can scientifically modify and they recommend some drugs which might already be present, or we can recommend some lifestyle changes. So as each person has a unique profile, every person has slightly different profiles. So all of these things can be like personalized. So they can be personalized anti-aging treatments which can help slow down the process, like the person was doing, right? Or they can and we can also like if this works quite well, then slightly reverse the biological age as well. Similarly, as we can see, we know that as we grow older, our mental health and the brain scans change over time. By understanding and using this approach, we can start understanding the underlying principle, how these effects are actually getting mapped to the pathways, compounds, and enzymes, and then recommend some anti-aging or slowing the aging process theories. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, do you guys have any demonstration to show?
No, we have an abstract that's submitted to you. This is, we built this upon the pathway to vectors, so this is completely novel. This is the first time anyone's seen it.
Questions, Judge, go.
Looks like you're training on Lopez O10 hallmarks of aging criteria for your modeling. Do you have any more proximate gold standards that you're using for next step? And have you done any comparative work based on other, not just epigenetic, but other omics, functional hybrid indices as a gold standard in which you're comparing them against?
Okay, so what pathway to work was basically is just an idea to represent this into higher vector spaces to analyze this. But after that, its release in 2020, Cancer to Web was also released with using this similar terminology. So what we're trying to do is basically use that understanding over here as well. And because we're machine learning engineers primarily, the biologics involved in this. We're not really familiar with that, but using the same terminologies that Cancer 2 Web was basically doing that across a group of diverse people. What we're doing that is do that vertically with temporal dimension. Instead of doing it on a large amount of people, we're just doing that in time for a single person, so that we can give them personalized drug rediscovery and, for example, personalized insights to improve their own health.
It's just like how you are measuring RDWs for a person for a long period of time.
Yeah. And if you don't have that data for that specific person, you can use near relatives for that purpose, because they have similar kind of genetics and can probably infer information that can be useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
So let's say you had 5 pathways, right? And one of them was out of whack or aged. So I guess you guys would come up with the algorithm to pick the intervention which would fix that one that's out of whack to get it to be younger, right? But what happens if then that messes up 2 others? How do you reframe the algorithm in that?
Okay, so once you're, for example, taking me for instance, you're age 10, you're age 20, you don't know about what you're going to be you're going to be at the state you're going to be at age 30. And if an intervention is done at age 20, you have relevance of, say, your parents who were at age 30 or 40. Those relatives are giving you an indication of if you move with your current trajectory, you're going to be somewhere around that. The intervention we do for yourself is at age 20, at when you reach age 30. Those are the 2 distinguishing features that we're going to be looking at then. So it's not like we have the prior information for what's going to be for that specific person. That is just an approximation of what the future would look like.
So you're taking the parents, you're looking at that's a big box, right? So you're looking at the individual and then you're modeling the intervention based on the parents' data too?
We're modeling the intervention based on the person himself. We're looking at if an intervention was not taken place, just for comparison purposes.
Right.
Yeah. So what would that look like?
What was his history?
If it affects positively or negatively, to cater for that in those instances.
All right, so I see that side of it, but then let's focus on the individual. So there are 5 pathways. You got one of them that's aged, or it's aging faster than the others. You come up with the intervention that addresses that one, but then 2 others get worse. Have you factored that in?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So one of the things that we will not do this on like we will divide the basically pathways on age like 10 and 20. But we first doing was we'll do at short intervals. But in short intervals, you don't basically find those specific pathways that are changing. For example, my RWs or my body is changing every day. So basically, when you are looking at long intervals and over a large period of data, for example, I'm looking for the 4 of us and different age gap from 10 to 80, and I'm not basically generalizing this upon from only a small data. From 10 to 20 might be some different changes, but from 10 to 80, if there is a specific pathway that is being changed and it's related to energy or something like that, then we can basically strongly say with this that maybe by changing this pathway or doing this intervention, we can do this. And intervention cannot always be like scientific or chemical, it can also be like lifestyle. For example, circadian rhythm, you can also just in sleep or different cycles like that or exercise, but it can be chemical as well. And when we will have data, we'll have more insights on it.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say, and that's a very valid point that if we do an intervention and it ends up messing things up more than they were before that, but that's where data comes in, right? So because this is machine learning, as we gain data for this specific purpose and it ends up messing things up, then those are insights that can basically drive further evaluation as well.
There's another side too. So if you imagine if you had everything quantified, right? So if there are 4,000 metabolites, we're able to measure all 4,000, not just whatever we can measure right now, it's like 600 to 1,000. So let's say you're able to measure everything. If you look at all of them and not necessarily even put them into pathways, you could technically look at the entropy, which is basically, what that whole everything looks like in the youthful state. But if I'm focused on 1 or 2 of those 4,000, does that really make a dent? The small weed in the giant forest.
Yeah.
But now you get past a certain level, and now you're starting to be on that age trajectory. So it's like looking almost at, the gross data and looking at the entropy difference relative to that youthful state rather than just a few. Even just trying to label it into pathways may be too narrow. You've got to look at as much data as you can for as many biomarkers as you can, right? And then tracking that entropy over time. That's just an idea.
And I want to add to Michael's point, I think the corollary to that is that there's a concept that you're measuring the subset of the pathways. There's also how tightly are those pathways linked to the outcomes that ultimately matter.
Yeah.
You need something to think about is ways to validate if everything you measure moves in the right direction, that they're actually getting healthier.
Yeah.
I think that's an important future step.
Yeah. Basically, the bigger pathway relationships, you're trying to say that if the pathway relationships are stronger enough, we're going into a grassroots level, we need to zoom out a bit and basically identify those things that are actually making a difference, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
But it's hard to say. Sometimes the weeds over a long period of time end up becoming the biggest problem, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. So those are the kind of insights we want to drive out of this. Okay. Any other questions?
Any last minute judge questions? One once? Any judge? Twice? Good? All right, awesome.